Hi, everybody. Before I get started, I want to let you know my friend Katie, who works at the Geek Bouquet, she actually sells tumblers and a variety of other keychains and everything. It's called the Geek Bouquet. This is one of her tumblers. I got, of course, I had Felcor. You can follow her on all the social media accounts, but especially Instagram. So if you're interested in one of her variety of Geek Bouquet tumblers or cups, check her out on Instagram today.
Good. Takes a lot of right stuff to make a good tumbler like that. So.
The perfect mixture. All right.
All right. We're going to jump into the 1983 film, The Right Stuff.
Which I consider the best film of 83. Let's see if he agrees with me.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. For our Aloha fans, sincerely, thank you for continuing to support the show. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. You're absolutely right. We do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great content and some great deals and great opportunities to tell us what movies we can review on the show in future episodes. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics reviews as well as ours. And hey, do us a solid. Hit the like and subscribe button. It's a little thing for you, but it's a big thing for us. It helps us out greatly. So, up next, we're going to talk about the 1983 film, Right Stuff.
So, beginning with the breaking of the sound barrier, we follow the Mercury 7 astronauts, a group of test pilots that will push the limits of human ingenuity and boldly go further than ever believed in an effort to see what's beyond the sky.
Okay, a little background. This is based on a book, but it was a series of publications in Rolling Stone by Tom Wolfe, the author, who was actually at the time became a super journalist. Rolling Stone either had like, what's the Gonzo journalist from Fear and Loathing? Hunter S. Thompson, or Tom Wolfe. Then you send him on assignments. And Rolling Stone sent him on assignment to cover, I think it was Apollo 17 space mission. But with interviewing other people, he thought just uncovering Mercury 7 would be a far more tantalizing subject than just covering the Apollo 17, which is the last mission that we send man to the moon. And through those pieces, he kicked out like a four issues of Rolling Stone's this continual investigation of Mercury 7. From that, it gets loose. The film gets loosely based on Tom Wolfe's story.
Yeah, and Tom Wolfe, who famously was not so happy with the finished product of the film.
Neither of them were the astronauts.
Well, yeah, but I also, want to throw back to Tom Wolfe and be like, it's better than Bonfire. So
right, yeah. But if you ever never read Tom Wolfe, just remember pretty much one page of Tom Wolfe's writing. There's about 10 exclamation points.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, he's excited, as we all should be.
So, Right Stuff came out in 1983, which is kind of about 30 years after this transpired.
Yeah, I suppose
I'm getting my math
it began, because it was in like the late 40s, early 50s that the film starts, and of course we move, I think, through into the 60s. Of course,
yes,
so.
Yeah. So it's like almost a span of 5 years of development. In the movie, they concentrate on a subplot of the career of Chuck Yeager, and that is never accounted in Tom Wolfe's original story. It was implanted with the screenwriters as well as director.
Well, originally William Goldman didn't have that involved. And William Goldman said, well, I don't feel like I can get anything out of the Chuck Yeager stuff. It's not really important. And then Philip Kaufman, who came in, kind of fresh off the heels of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, didn't want to have. He wanted to focus on Yeager. He thought Yeager had the right stuff. He was like, this is the whole point of the film, is that Yeager is the greatest pilot. And so there's been some derision with that, because Goldman even said afterwards, he goes, I like what's being done on screen. I don't like the Chuck Yeager stuff still. So,
which is interesting, because I think when we get to my review, it's an interesting subplot because it derives from the concentration of what you think you should be concentrating on.
Yeah.
It's an interesting subplot, almost like Cormac McCarthy kind of a subplot. Right.
Yeah, he's kind of introduced at the beginning. He has a bit of a story. At the end, he has a bit of a story. And then in the middle, he's kind of just a commentator. He's just kind of inserted into the film to kind of remark on the elements that are going on. Almost like a newscaster, if you will.
Okay, this is probably, at the time, if we would nominate for ensemble cast, this would probably be up there if we did in the 80s in categories of ensemble casting. You got Ed Harris, Sam Shepard, who plays Chuck Yeager. You got Scott Glenn, Scott Wilson, don't forget about him. Donald Moffat, who plays a wonderful Lyndon Johnson in there. And Dennis Quaid, who does Dennis Quaid. And you got a little snippets of Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum in this movie. But also, there's a great supporting cast for females. And one of them I want to give a shout out is Pamela Reed. We never see again until Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah, Pamela Reed is Kindergarten Cop and Junior. So it's like 2 comedies with Schwarzenegger. And then for those of you Parks and Rec fans, she plays Leslie Knope's mother on that show, and she's terrific because she's kind of the hard-assed mother who has been in politics too long. I really love her on that show.
Yeah. And also the great one, Fred Ward.
Exactly, yeah. Fred Ward, who we're definitely not going to cover next time with another Fred Ward film. Spoiler alert. My favorite joke about the cast here is that you have these characters kind of placed. You have a man named Harris playing a man named Glenn, a man named Glenn playing a man named Shepard, and a man named Shepard playing a man named Yeager. Follow that. Right? Yeah. So
and it's nice. Well, an interesting side note. Sam Shepard was an accomplished screenwriter and author himself as well, too.
Yep.
Yeah. Carry on.
One of the things I find interesting about Sam Shepard actually in the film is the fact that he was afraid of flying, and it's kind of his only thing in the movie is he has to sell being a pilot. He has to sell being able to push the limit. It's like watching Top Gun Maverick and then finding out that Tom Cruise didn't get in the plane because he was scared. So Sam Shepard had a lot to overcome in that performance, and it's funny that his is the one who got the nomination for the Academy Awards.
The only performance nomination in the movie.
Because it's something that he definitely had to overcome, even if he wasn't actively in the air. He had to fake being excited about it. So,
a little side note. Here in Minnesota, there's a town called Woodbury, and my photographer for my last film, he was an on-site still photographer, had a horse that he rented and just kept at a ranch. And he would also visit his horse, so he paid the ranch to keep his horse there. And one day he went out just to ride his horse, and he saw people that seemed out of place for ranching, but they were now accomplished horse riders. And he realized it was Jessica Lange and Sam Shepard riding the horses that were staying at the ranch, too. And they had a nice chat about horses. So Sam really knew about horses more than probably aviation in real life. Okay, so you have a great ensemble cast. You got the screenplay. Then you get Philip Kaufman, who check out Unbearable Lightness of Being with Daniel Day-Lewis. It's one of those kind of unknown movies that was a hit in the 80s and kind of fade away from conversations.
I think his only Oscar nomination came from writing the screenplay for that, if I'm correct.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of Quills. I know a lot of people kind of poo-poo it, but it's about the life of Marquis de Sade, and Philip Kaufman directed that. But I'm also a big fan of that. Kate Winslet does a marvelous performance, Joaquin Phoenix in it. So it's kind of he does after the right stuff. Philip Kaufman does a lot of under the radar kind of films that actually kick out pretty good content.
Yeah, Kaufman's era right there in that 78 to 81, or I guess to 83 period of like throwing out one of the best horror remakes of all time with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, co-writing Raiders of the Lost Ark, and someone we don't give credit for in any way, shape, or form, being involved in the writing of that and the creation of that, and then coming in with The Right Stuff, are just these like 3 bombastic giant films, and then you never see him in that kind of limelight again. He kind of picked these smaller films, picked these more personal things.
Right. And if you didn't know, he's also the co-screenwriter for the latest Indiana Jones movie that's probably came out by the time.
Well, he just has the creation credit because of the character. Oh, yeah, he's involved in that way, but he doesn't have the actual screenplay credit for it.
Thanks for clearing that up, because I think George Lucas didn't really write it as well, did he?
That's the whole thing about Lucas. Lucas is a great storyteller. But he's not a great screenwriter. So he should give you the ideas and you should go write it.
We've had this conversation before. Somebody needs to tell Lucas your story, then I'm going to take it from here.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So, I'll cover most of the background. And by the 80s, space exploration is pretty an automatic thing until you have the 1985 incident. So it's become regularly routine. It wasn't really covered as much. And I think this gets back into, in the early 80s, especially in the Reagan era, these kind of not really pro-patriotic, but really emphasis of what America made America proud. The accomplishments. And we go back in the early 80s, especially when Reagan's first administration, these things kind of right time.
Yeah.
I always call it the right stuff, but I always call it the right time for the movie.
Well, it probably was. I mean, and that's both from a philosophical standpoint and also just a technical standpoint. Like, this was, I feel like this was the movie where space stopped seeming kooky. Like, space stopped being about science fiction. I love Forbidden Planet, but that's a kooky looking space, you know,
Right.
kind of a setting and everything. It's like that zhuzhed up sci-fi that's fake.
Even the original
You know.
Star Trek seems like they're in a submarine all the time.
Yeah, because Star Trek always feels like what we should be, not what we are.
Well,
And then,
not
of
the
course, you
politics
get-
of it, but inside a cubicle spaceship, it's always seems like a submarine.
Yeah.
I know the content of Star Trek is finding advanced, kind of progressive viewpoints.
Yeah,
But-
and even that's kind of done too. And
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, like it's kind of a big tin can, and there's people that are, you know, like green people that are always in love with William Shatner, which I get. But then, you know, Star Wars was again kind of not a realistic take of. I'm sorry, not a realistic.
No, it's a
take
kid's.
of space,
So
you know?
let's go get the
Yeah,
Empire.
but
You know?
The Right Stuff was the movie where it's like, I think we can do this on film. I think we can make this look good, and the film looks good even 40 years later.
Well, the background of it, it was very. I mean, we never did anything like this before, so it's very dangerous. Something new. You're going to test fail. I like how the engineers designed the missile, the cockpit,
Yeah.
and then the aviator's like, no, we want this and this and this, and it's all those ingredients you forget. Well, maybe we should have the astronauts wear diapers. You know?
Yeah.
'Cause-
Well, and what's interesting too, if you follow the story of Gus Grissom, is that many things that led to his death were things he actually talked about with the we want a window, we want exploding bolts, we want like things that we can get out of here if there's a problem. The things that led to Gus Grissom's own death were the things that he was talking about. So I'm not sure realistically if he ever actually spoke about it, but it's an interesting piece of dramatic irony, I guess, to play into the film, and that he's literally asking for the things that would save his life.
And he was the second one to be launched after John Glenn, because I'm not Scott. I'm going to use Scott.
I told you.
Right. After John Glenn goes for the first orbit, but then Gus Grissom does it next, and it's not as celebrated, even though it is kind of a remarkable. There was just a hiccup for the launch,
Yeah.
and it seems you see the adulations contrast to what Gus Grissom did, and then you see what Chuck Yeager says about both of them, saying you have to be far more braver than me to do any of that.
Yeah.
And he should be celebrated also. And I think that's the right temperament for this film. And later on, I'll get to my review.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that when you think about a movie like The Right Stuff, 40 years removed, I think most people would think, well, it was nominated for Best Picture. It had,
Right.
7 other Academy Award nominations, 4 wins, and like this movie had to have made a ton of money, right? Well, it had such a ridiculous box office kind of situation where the film entered turnaround, which is the process where basically we can't afford to finish the film, so it enters this kind of stasis. It was saved by the Ladd Company, who injected $17 million into
Alan
it.
Ladd Company.
Unfortunately, this movie is seen as one of the stepping stones to the death of the Ladd Company, because following Heaven's Gate's failure, that was what
like
caused this film to get to turnaround, where then it was saved by Ladd, and then its box office loss began that process downward that would eventually destroy the Ladd Company. And it's too bad, because Ladd kind of seemed to just inject this money as like, I got to save these movies that are having trouble. And unfortunately, that can only get you so far.
Right. And then Heaven's Gate was just, it hurt everybody, including Paramount.
Yeah, but the film made $21 million on a budget of 27. And people don't understand as well, that $21 million doesn't just go to the studio. That goes to the theaters and the studio, and there's also marketing budgets. So like this movie lost at least $17-18 million for the company, which when you're talking about something like the Ladd Company, is not a lot of money that you got sitting around.
No,
So-
you don't have 17 in your vault to throw at saving a movie.
Yeah. So in many ways, this film is seen as the classic it is because of the VHS boom, because it did very well on home video. And by the time the 90s rolled around, the film was considered a classic, but it was kind of a underground film through a lot of the 80s that you wouldn't have watched if you weren't a fan of space. Like, you wouldn't have gone out to see it if you weren't really interested in it.
You got to understand, this came out after Return of the Jedi. We're kind of sci-fi saturated.
Yeah.
And then you get this, well, this is based on the true astronauts, and people are kind of like, well, I know the story. I don't need to see this.
Yeah. And let's not forget, I mean, I do imagine a 3-hour and 12-minute movie probably turns some people away.
Yeah.
You know? That is a long movie. That is a long movie even by today's standards. We complain about movies being too long today.
3
That is
hour,
still a
yeah.
long movie.
It's a 3-hour movie, which will be ho-hum for summer, but
Yeah, which is why I think when it was remade, actually, there was a remake to The Right Stuff maybe 2-3 years ago. They turned it into a miniseries because they just felt that's going to work better on television, and I do think that's probably a correct interpretation.
Wasn't that 10 years ago they made a miniseries?
No, it was just on Nat Geo, and I think it's on Disney Plus now, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There was The Real Right Stuff, which was the documentary series about
see,
that. Very
this
confusing.
is what happens when you're a Gen Xer, because I know there's a remake of it, right?
Should I go through the actor again? No, I'm joking.
All right. But I like the performances in this version. Yes. All right. Up next is our review of The Right Stuff.
I was really positive on a lot of elements of the film. I loved a lot of elements. I liked some elements. There's a few things I'm like in the idea of I think the Jaeger stuff could have been cut.
Oh.
It's not a fault on it being bad. I just think I was more interested in the Mercury 7 guys. I understand what Philip Kaufman's going for, but I feel like you could streamline the film a little bit, cut out the Jaeger stuff, which is unfortunate because I think it's good stuff. I just think maybe it belongs in its own separate movie.
I agree with everybody there, but I do like it. I'll disagree with you. I do like the point because the emphasis is these people had a increment, then a pyramid that they had accomplished to get into a pinnacle, what they considered a right ingredients to be an astronaut. And then you have the counterpoint of Chuck Yeager, who didn't have a college education. He just went into the service.
Yeah.
And everybody who was in the Mercury 7 probably give accolades to him rather than Chuck Yeager. It's a subplot that, it doesn't seem, it fits. Seems that you should have its own movie, but, after the accomplishments of even him get diminished, even though he break records and records and records, what they're doing overlays.
Yeah, I just feel like it kind of disturbs the flow of the film. I as much as I respect what's being done and even like what's being done, you've got me interested now in these 7 guys. And I think every time we feel like we're taking away from that, I'm losing my focus on those stories. Okay. I feel like as a purely character, because this is not a documentary of the film, the Jaeger stuff should be there like a constant presence in the film without actually being full scenes and full plotting. Like he should be a presence in the film. And you could even have Sam Shepard, but just minimizing what he is and making him kind of like sprinkled over,
I'll give you one. I'll agree with you one thing. The horse race with his wife back home, get rid of it.
Yeah, at the very least, trim down his stuff so it's real killer, no filler.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like there's some filler in there. It doesn't work for me. And I see what Philip Kaufman is going for. I totally get that. It just didn't really, jive with me.
There's some actually very unique editing transition points of like the camera goes into the jet exhaust. Mm-hmm. And that dark becomes the next scene of the tunnel as they emerge. So there's a couple of those scenes that actually these visual transition editing things that I think is interesting. I do like it, but it doesn't make the process smoother. You take a lot of time just to get these guys going. I think it's like maybe 40 minutes in the movie that finally they get these guys together.
Oh, yeah.
So it does take a long process of observing a little bit of patience. But I do like where the movie is. Each character has their own distinct characterization. Everybody's a little bit different.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say little. Everybody's very distinctly different. You understand John Glenn's and Gus Grissom's dialogue. You understand where they're coming from with very little things to engage.
And this is the thing where I think the casting is so important and such a plus on the film, is that I feel like through the dialogue alone, that would not have been fully successful.
No.
It would have been good, but it would not have been as successful as it was in getting these drastically different actors who could embody those characters. And I don't even think many of them are really like stretching the boundaries of their acting performance, because Fred Ward in the film as Gus Grissom is still Fred Ward in the film playing Gus Grissom.
And his buddy Dennis Quaid is playing
Dennis Quaid is playing Dennis Quaid. He's just cast really well into a character that fits his kind of performance style. So it's kind of like we didn't ask these guys to go above and beyond, and that's maybe why they didn't get acting nominations, because they are in many ways playing exactly who you'd expect them to. But they do such a good job at playing what they're cast to do.
Yes.
So I think that's a great strength of the film, is that you have 7 main characters, 8 if you count Jaeger, and each one of them is so drastically distinct that you can get a full character arc out of them in 3 hours, which is that's a lot to ask.
Yeah. It's a little bit surprised because I won't say Ed Harris carries the movie, but he's also the center point kind of the whole group. He's almost the unofficial leader. They don't really call him that, but yeah, he's almost their leader spokesperson because he's such this clean guy.
Well, and his character too. I mean, John Glenn was a more enigmatic person. He's during that one scene where they're all talking, it's like going into a prize fight. Like he's the one who uplifts the mood of what's going on because everyone's giving these one-word answers. Like that's, I think, the injection of style that Ed Harris brings to the table. And Ed Harris is a guy who's been quietly doing great work for 40 plus years.
Yeah. Check out
and,
China
you know,
Moon if you haven't heard of it. It's
well, and
pretty
I always think too, he's one of my favorite people to pop up in a Stephen King thing. He was in The Stand, and he was in Creep Show, and he was in Needful Things. Like every time he comes in, he's like, wow, that's a Stephen King character. But he's always one of those guys that's perfectly cast. And when he comes in, he just injects the film with something new. And I think that's what he does here.
Yeah, and it's very well grounded in an ensemble cast. Understand you could probably clean up the story. There's always going to debate about the subplot of Chuck Yeager. I do like it's injected because it's a nice counterpoint of, even though what these guys are doing, we're still doing this at a marvelous task.
Yeah.
And this is going to get Olsen page 5 of the newspaper, even though you're breaking Mach 3.
Well, and I do think, going back to the Yeager thing, I do think a different style of editing might have helped that subplot. I feel like it might, for me, it might have made that thing more prevalent.
Cut out the horse thing. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, he disappears from the movie so much that I feel like I'm not interested in him when we return to him. And I think if you peppered him in more, or spaced out his story, maybe seeing it through flashbacks as the film goes on, something else would have been more interesting to me than disappearing for the entire
just
time.
Intentionally crashing the plane just to have a little bit of taste of what the other guys are experiencing.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah, but as a William Goldman fan, I feel validated that he didn't care for it either. So,
as a kid in the '80s, I only know Chuck Yeager because he was promoting commercials for car motor oil.
Yeah,
all the time. And I was like, when my dad's like, well, he's a pilot. Well, why does he talk about planes? He always talks about cars.
It's weird to me that Chuck Yeager feels like the name of the movie. Like he's in a movie with 7 astronauts, and he feels like the name. Like I recognize that name almost before any others. But yeah, Sam Shepard is very strong at it. But yeah, just everything with that. Yeah, the horse riding.
Yes, 10 minutes that could have been not removed. But I do like the temperament overall story. I do like when Dennis Quaid's character Gordo. How do you get your picture on the wall? Well, you have to be dead. All this. I want to be on my. You can see my picture on the wall. All the kids,
Yeah.
At the bar, you have
asked by Olin Jones, who was married to Sam Shepard at that time. So interesting.
But you have that at the banquet. You have all these reporters asking Gordo, "Who's the best pilot you ever seen?" And that's his gag. I am. And then he reflects, well, maybe it's you get that thing. Maybe you say it.
Yeah.
But then he's like, everybody wants the catchphrase, so I'll just go with the catchphrase.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have what I would say is emphasis. I don't say it's a great overall script, but it balances out the contrast of him saying it, being egotistical, but knows kind of the back of the mind consciously who would be a best pilot.
Yeah. Well, the screenplay and the story itself does follow in many ways the hero's journey. It's just many, many heroes. But it follows the hero's journey in that we set up an obstacle, we overcome it. But it kind of, I would subcategorize the film almost as a cause and effect, a guess and test film, if you will, which reminded me a lot of actually a more recent space film, First Man, Damien Chazelle's underrated movie with Ryan Gosling, which was all about the exact same thing, the guess and test. We're going to try something, it fails. We try something else, it fails. We try something that kind of works, now we got to figure out this problem. And I love movies that can really accomplish failing 90% of the time, because that 10% of success is what moves the story along. And it's a tough thing to muster in both the screenplay and as a director, is to showcase the constant struggle of pushing the envelope. And I think it's done really, really well here. And I think that's one of the benefits, again, of having a lengthy movie, is you can't do it really easily with 80 minutes.
No. There's a documentary that we both put on our list a while back. What is it, Apollo 11?
Apollo 11, which was, unfortunately, you can't see it in IMAX anymore. That was the best way to see it, but it's still pretty good at home, too.
Yeah. A non-narrative documentary of just the experience of what you had to do just to launch just one mission.
Yeah.
And it looks fantastic. All the complexities of this. This seems, compared to that documentary, and then you watch this movie seems a little tight-knit, a little compact, where you get the wide scope of all the technical stuff that goes on with the documentary Apollo 11.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the film is I didn't really know where the film was going to leave off. Because that's the thing about it, is when it starts with the things like breaking the sound barrier and we introduce these characters, I'm wondering, how far are we going to go into time? Like, when are we going to end the story, I wonder? Because I was like, are we going to get to the moon in this movie? Like, I'm looking, I was like, we got 40 minutes left. We might get to the moon. Like, it was an uncertain kind of where the film would lead off. And that's kind of whether or not people enjoy the film, is that if you're happy and content with the character journeys by the end of it, and I was. Yeah. I felt like we got enough closure for the 7 characters that I was most involved with.
Do you like that ending? Because it's a little more hilarious.
I did, yeah. Because, again, I like the things I don't like about Dennis Quaid's character. And I think it would have been better to end on something a little bit more like uplifting, a little bit happier, which is what the film kind of does. Because if you'd ended with, oh, by the way, Gus Grissom also died, you know, it's like that when they hit that, I was like, oh, don't end there. And then we kind of move on to like, oh, I forgot, like the guy finally got to get to space. You know, he got to do his thing.
And for a brief moment.
Yeah, very, very brief. You know, but you have that in juxtaposition too with Ed Harris as John Glenn when he gets up there and he sees, you know, what he almost perceives as being some sort of alien life force.
Yeah.
You know, that we later find out to be ice crystals that have developed. I think that's a really fascinating juxtaposition, is looking how John Glenn is looking at it with hope, and Dennis Quaid sees this beautiful image and is kind of just like, whatever.
Yeah. Gordo is just kind of like, I just want to go fast.
Yeah.
So, have you seen The Right Stuff?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts on the film down below, and give us maybe your favorite space-related film. Your favorite, you know, because there's a lot. There's Apollo 13, like I mentioned, the First Man.
Even though it's deeply a flawed story, there's a lot of errors into it. First Man is a remarkable movie.
Yeah, I think it's what you do with it. And again, we're not talking documentaries here, but like if you do want a great, like absolutely true detail one, Apollo 11 is great. So definitely check that one out. Or For All Mankind, which I think is a very fascinating one that came out in the 60s, 70s. That really was interesting because it followed multiple races at the same time.
Yep.
And so it was a little bit more, you have to like kind of close off your mind to it and just kind of feel what they feel. But there's some really good ones out there, and we'd love to know your favorite down below. As Nick pointed out, make sure you like and subscribe. Check out all those links down below in the description for more information about the show. And thank you guys for watching us. You can find all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
I think, you haven't seen 2010? The sequel?
I've seen 2010.
Yeah, I think it came out at the same time.
I like it more than the first one.
I know. People like it a little bit more, so, join the Patreon and tell us to watch 2010. Maybe we'll talk about that one, another space movie in the future.
Perfect.